We begin the Gemara on Daf Zayin, Amud Aleph, the top line, Amud Rav Sheshes. The Gemara here brought a machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes regarding Tumah and a carbon tzibur. Rav Nachman says, Tumah hutra b'tzibur, that if it's a carbon tzibur, even if the kayanim are tameh, it's a heter without any issue whatsoever. The kayan can go ahead and be makriv of a carbon, even if there's another kayan which is tired available. Rav Sheshes, however, says Tuma d'chuyehi b'tzibur. Only if you can have no other option, you can't find any other kayin, so then there's no alternative. This kayin can bring the carbon even though he's tameh. But if you could, you have to try to find another kayin, even if he's not from this Beis Av, and so on, as the Gemara discussed various opinions about this. So now the Gemara continues in this subject and says, Amar Rav Sheshes, Sheshes said, Mino aminallah. What's the source for my opinion that the tumah is only pushed off if there's no alternative? The Tanya, because we learned in the Braisa as follows. The Kayin was standing in the Beis HaMikdash and he's bringing the Minchas HaOmer, which is the carbon Omer brought on the second day of Pesach, the barley carbon Mincha that's brought. And it became tameh in his hands. Omer, he tells his friend, the Kayin with him about this, and Muviyin acheres tachtah, and they go and they cut new sa'irim to bring instead for the carbon mincha. And ein sham elohi, if all they have is this barley for the carbon mincha, they don't have another option, then, so he doesn't do anything about it. Oimrim loy, they tell him, have a pikeach, you should just be smart and you should take and be quiet. And you'll bring this one because it's a carbon tzibur, and it's tameh, and there's no other option, and the tumah is hotre b'tzibur. However, it says over here, that if there's another option, so he should tell his friend, and they should bring another carbon oimer. So you see over here that the tumah is not hotra b'tzibur. If it's totally hotter, which means even if you have an alternative, you can bring the one that's tameh, like Rav Nachman says. So then why would he have to tell his friend about this? Just bring it as it is, even if it's tameh. But Rav Sheshes says that if you have an alternative, you have to bring the alternative. So that's exactly what it says here in the Braisa, that he tries to bring another carbon mincha. Rav Nachman responds and explains how he would learn this Braisa. Maidina, I would agree to you, when there is a carbon mincha that's brought, even though it's a carbon mincha b'tzibur, and it's totally hutra b'tzibur, however, there's a shirayim of this mincha that has to be eaten. And the tumah is hutra b'tzibur only to burn it on the mizbeach, but not to eat it. So therefore, if you're going to bring the one that's tameh, so then you're not going to have the mitzvah of achilas kachim that has to be eaten over here. So therefore, even Rav Nachman agrees that in this case, you should make an effort to try and bring another carbon mincha, which is tahir. So then, not only will it be able to be burnt on the mizbeach, but you could also eat what has to be eaten. Meisvei, the question was asked on Rav Nachman's opinion that says that it's totally hutra b'tzibur. Hoya makriv minchas parim ve'elim ukvasim. If the kain was being makriv, the carbon mincha that comes along with parim, elim, and kvasim, these are karbanis tzibur, v'nitmes biyadai, and the mincha became tameh in his hands. Oimer, he tells his friend, and they go and they bring another one instead of this. Ve'im ein sham elohi, and if all they have is this mincha, then they tell him, be smart, or shtoik, and be quiet, and bring this one, because it's tameh, and it's tumah hotra b'tzibur. So my love, don't you think, what are we talking about over here? Parim, elim, ukvasim, dechag. If we're talking about a case where we say that it's going to be hutra if it's tameh, so then, or that it's going to be pushed off if it's tameh, so then it must be that we're talking about karbanis tzibur. Which karbanis tzibur are we talking about regarding parim, elim, and kvasim? The parim, elim, and kvasim of Chag, of Sukkis, or of any of the other Yomim Tovim. And there's the mincha that's brought together with these karbanis. And regarding this, what does it say here in the Braisa? That if he's able to find another one, he should find another one to replace the one that's tameh. Only if he's unable, then he should be quiet and bring this. So again, we see, like the opinion of Rav Sheshes, that it's only pushed off if there's no alternative. But if there's an alternative, it's not completely hutra. And in this case, you can't answer like it said before, because it has to be eaten, and therefore we want to bring one that could be eaten, because over here, by these karbanis tzibur, the parim, elim, and kvasim of the yontif, the carbon mincha was completely burned on the mizbeach. Amalach Rav Nachman will answer you, Loi, the parim over here that we're talking about is not the parim of Sukkis or the Yomim Tovim, and same thing, Elim and Kvasim, they're not referring to the Karbanas Sibur that were brought in Yomim Tovim. And he explains, parim, when it says the bulls, which parim are they? Par Avodah Zarah. This is when the whole Sibur, B'chira as Bezdin, served Avodah Zarah, and then there's a carbon Sibur that they all have to bring for serving Avodah Zarah. Afal Gav, the Tzibur, so even though this is a carbon Tzibur, but Kivin, the Lekvia Leizman, but since there's not an established time of when this carbon has to be brought, you have to bring it for serving Avodah Zarah, but if it can't be brought today, it can be brought tomorrow, Ma'adrinon. So we try to find another carbon mincha that will be tahir in order to be able to bring it together with this par. So that's a case where it is a carbon tzibur, but because it's not a set time, so over here, we don't say that it's completely hutra b'tzibur, even according to Rav Nachman, since it could be brought on another day. Elim, when it says in the Braisa the rams, we're also not talking about the rams of the Yom Tov. What are we talking about? Be'eloi shel Aaron. It refers to the ram that Aaron HaKohen brings on Yom Kippur. The Afagav, the Kviyah Leizman, even though that does have a set time that is brought in Yom Kippur. But Kivin, the Yachid, who, however, since this is a carbon that belongs to Aaron, that he is bringing it with his Aved in the Beis HaMikdash, Mahadrinon, we try to bring one that's Tahir, although to a certain extent it's considered to be like a carbon Tzibur, has a set time, and it's brought in Yom Kippur, together with all the other Karbanas Tzibur. But however, since this is the Isle of Aaron, even Rav Nachman will be mighty here, that if you can, you have to bring a different one which is Tahir. And kvasim, when it says there in the Braisa kvasim, we're also not talking about the regular kvasim that are brought on Yom Tov. What are we speaking about? Bekeves haba ima oimer. This is the keves that's brought together with the carbon oimer. And regarding that, the Braisa says that the mincha that's brought with the keves, what is that? The carbon oimer. And what did we say before about the carbon oimer? That even Rav Nachman would agree that you should try to find another one. Why? The ikeshirayim la'achila. Because by the carbon oimer, this is a mincha that's not totally burnt on the mizbeach. This is a mincha that the shirayim are eaten by the kayanim, and if you're going to bring one that's tameh, they're not going to be able to eat it, like we already explained before. So this braisa is not a question on Rav Nachman. Meisvei, another braisa, which is a question on Rav Nachman, it says in the braisa, dam shenitma, the blood that became tameh. So and you're not supposed to be sprayed on the mizbeach, but v'zarkai, he did spray it on the mizbeach. B'shoigig, if he did so b'shoigig hurtza, then it'll be accepted. It appeases. B'mezid, if he did so b'mezid, then loy hurtza, then it will not be accepted. So what do we see over here? The b'mezid loy hurtza is only because of a knas that the Rabbanan said that it should not be accepted because it was done b'mezid. But if it was done b'shoigig, then hurtza. And the reason why it's hurtza is because you have the tzitz. The tzitz is meratzeh in order for it to be able to be accepted. As long as there's a tumah and a carbon, that the dam was sprayed with tumah, that's the effect of the tzitz, as we'll see in the continuation of the Gemara, that the tzitz is meratzeh. It causes that all the karbanos that became tameh should be appeased and should be accepted. So what do we see over here? That when you have the dam that became tameh, Thomas Mace, and it says that it's only because of the tzitz, which is meratzeh, so therefore it's accepted. So this is actually a question on Rav Shesh's opinion, because over here you see that we're relying on the tzitz to be meratzeh. So sorry, it's a question of Rav Nachman's opinion. Rav Nachman says that the tumah is completely hutra b'tzibur. If it's completely hutra b'tzibur, you don't need the tzitz to be meratzeh. It's going to always be accepted either way. So why over here does it say b'shoigig hurtza only because of the tzitz, which is mashma that it's tchuya, it's really pushed off, and you need the tzitz in order for it to be accepted. And it says the Gemara, Kitanya hahi di yochid. That braisa is not talking about a carbon sibur. That braisa is talking about a carbon that's brought by a yochid. So in such a case, if it was by mistake or sprayed in the mizbeach after it was tameh, you're going to need the effect of the tzitz in order to be meratzeh for it. Tashema, another braisa, it says, Alma hatzitz meratzeh. What was the tzitz? When it says in the Torah that the tzitz that the kohen wears is meratzeh on the karbanis of the Beis HaMikdash, that it should be accepted even though it wasn't done properly. Regarding what does the effect of the tzitz help? Meratzeh al adam vala basar vala chelev. So it helps for the blood, for the meat of the carbon, for the fats of the carbon, shenitma, that became tamei, bein b'shegig, whether it happened inadvertently, bein b'mezid, or deliberately, bein b'aynes, bein b'ratzen, whether with an aynes or willingly. Ratzen and mezid are really the same thing. Bein b'yachid, bein b'tzibur, and it says it clearly whether it's a carbon yachid, whether it's a carbon tzibur. And for all of these cases, you need the effect of the tzitz in order for it to be accepted. Now, according to Rav Nachman, that if it's a carbon sibur, so then it's completely permitted. Why does this Braisa say that you have to have the effect of the tzitz even for the carbon sibur? It's totally permitted. Amalach Rav Nachman will answer you, Ki katani atzitz meratzeh adu yachid. The beginning of the Braisa, when it says that tzitz has its effect that it should be meratzeh, that only refers to the carbon yachid. It mentions tzibur as well, because you could bring the carbon tzibur even if you're tameh. But over there you don't actually need the effect of the tzibur, of the tzitz that is, for the carbon tzibur. That's one answer. Yubai same another answer, afilateme b'tzibur. When it says in this braisa that you need the effect of the tzitz for a carbon tzibur, it's true. It's even for a carbon tzibur you need it. But when? Only a carbon sibur that does not have a set time when it's brought, like the example that we mentioned before, the carbon of the sibur that served the Avodah Zarah, that brings a par that doesn't have a set time. But a carbon sibur that has a set time, Rav Nachman says, Tumu hutra b'tzibur, and you don't need the effect of the tzitz at all. Meisvei, question was asked from this Braisa where it says, V'nasa Aaron es avayna kadoshim, that when Aaron wears the tzitz, so this forgives for any sin that was done with the kachim. So the question the Braisa asks is, V'chi'eza avanu noisa. For what problem, for what issue that there was with the karbanis does it forgive? Im avim pigol, is it regarding pigol, which in this context it means when the kain had a machshava to be makriv the carbon shaloi bim kaimai, not in the right area, or to eat it not in the right place. Harei kvar nemar, but it already says regarding that lo yiratze, that it will not be accepted. So the tzitz does not work for that. V'im avim noisar, that is it the aveira of noisar. In this context, noisar means if the kain, when he brought the carbon, had in mind to eat it out of its allotted time. Harei kvar nema. Regarding that, the pasuk says lo yechashiv. It shouldn't be counted. It's not accepted. So we can't say that the tzitz is meratzah for that. Ha'ena noisa ela avayin tumah. So the tzitz is effective only for the issue of a carbon that became tameh. Why tumah? Why is this less than the other issues that we mentioned? Shahutra miklala b'tzibur. Because here we find by a carbon that becomes tameh, that when it's a carbon sibur that becomes tameh, that it's totally mutter. You don't even need the effect of the tzitz. So since I see that by the tumah it is a leniency when it's a carbon sibur, that it's totally mutter, so therefore I say that when the Torah says that the tzitz is meratzeh, it refers to a tumah by a carbon yachid. That's what it says in the Braisa. Says the Gemara, the Kashil Rav Sheshes. This is a question of Rav Sheshes' opinion. It says very clearly in the Braisa that a carbon sibur is hutra. It's totally mutter. You don't even need the effect of the tzitz in order for the carbon to be accepted. So the Gemara answers, Tanoihi. Rav Sheshes will tell you that this question that we have, whether a carbon sibur is completely hutra with its tameh, or you need the effect of the tzitz because it's only the chuya, is a machlekes Tanoim. Tanya, because in another Braisa we learned tzitz. This tzitz that we say that it has the effect in order to appease the tumah, that it should be accepted. Bein sheyeshne al mitzchay, bein she'einei al mitzchay. Whether the kain is wearing it on his forehead, whether he's not wearing it on his forehead, meratzah. It appeases. Divrei Rab Shimon. That's Rab Shimon's opinion. Rab Yudah says, oideyu al mitzchay, if it's on his forehead, meratzah. So then it appeases. If it's not on his forehead, it doesn't have the effect. Amalei Rab Shimon. So Rab Shimon says to Rab Yehuda, I'll prove you my opinion. Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim yechiach. From the case of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, you can see she'ein eideyu al mitzchay, even when he's not wearing the tzitz on his forehead, u'meratzah. And the effect of the tzitz is even then as well. In the Avodah of Yom Kippur, he does not wear the tzitz on his forehead the entire time, because there are the times in the day when he only wears the big day lavan, not the regular begotten, which included tzitz. He wears the white big day kahuna, which does not include the tzitz. And even at that time, if there's any tumah of the carbon that he brings inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim and so on, it's meratzeh, even if the kohen is not wearing it. So from here, from Yom Kippur, I see that the effect of the tzitz is even when he does not wear it. That was Rav Shimon's raya. Amalei Rav Yehuda responds to this raya and says, no, there's no raya from there. Hanach lekohen gadol b'yoma kippurim, leave that case of the kohen gadol and Yom Kippur, shetuma hutra loy b'tzibur. The reason why, even if he becomes tamei, his karbanis will be accepted, he can continue bringing his karbanis, is because over there it's a carbon tzibur that he has to bring on Yom Kippur, and it's totally mutter. You don't need any of the effect of the tzitz at all. So what do we see here? Miklal, that Rab Shimon sava tumah d'choye b'tzibur. So Rab Shimon that did bring a raya from Yom Kippur that the effect of the tzitz is even when the kohen is not wearing it. It means that Rab Shimon held that even for the karbanis tzibur of Yom Kippur, you need the effect of the tzitz in order for it to be meratzah. So right over here, you see clearly the machlekes of Rab Shimon and Rab Yehuda is this exact machlekes of Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes, whether the tumah of a tzibur by the carbon tzibur is the chuye b'tzibur. That's the opinion of Rav Shimon, and or it's tumah hutra b'tzibur, which is what Rav Yehuda clearly says, tumah hutra b'tzibur. Amar Abaye, now Abaye explains this machlekes here between Rav Yehuda and Rav Shimon, whether the tzitz is meratzeh when it's not on the forehead of the kohen gadol. When exactly are they arguing? So Abaye says, "B'nishbar tzitz." If this tzitz, not only is it not on the kohen's forehead, but it actually was broken, nobody would disagree that then it doesn't have an effect. Ki pligi, when are they arguing the tali b'sichse? If it's hanging on a peg, the kohen is not currently wearing it, but it's still intact. Rabbi Yuda's opinion is, the pasuk says, al meitzach v'nosa. Here the pasuk says, v'hoya al meitzach aren, v'nosa aren es avein hakadoshim hashekdishu b'nei Yisrael. So here it says, if it's only al metzach, if it's on his forehead, then v'nosa, then it forgives for the tumah. Rab Shimon says, further in that pasuk, what does it say? V'hoya al mitzchay tomid, l'ratzon lahem l'fnei Hashem. So it says, tomid l'ratzon l'fnei Hashem. So what does this mean? My tomid, what does it mean that it should be constantly on his forehead? Is this pasuk coming to tell me literally that he has to wear it constantly? If you think that would mean to say that he has to constantly wear it, mi mishkachasla, is that possible? Milei boy meil lebeis does he not have to use the bathroom? Or milei boy meinam, does he not have to sleep? And at those times he can't wear the tzitz. Elo, so therefore Rab Shimon says, what does tamid mean? Tamid miratzahu. Sorry, it's going to always appease. This is Rab Shimon's source from the word tamid, that the effect of the tzitz is constant, whether the kohen is wearing it, whether he's not wearing it. Well, Rabbi Yehuda nami, so now the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Yehuda, haksiv tamid, the pasuk says tamid, so what does he learn out from this tamid? It certainly doesn't mean that he has to wear it constantly, and he doesn't hold that we learn from here that it's meratzah constantly, so what do you learn from tamid? Says the Gemara, hahu tamid, according to Rabbi Yehuda, what does tamid mean? Shalei daita mimeno, that as long as he's wearing it, he shouldn't take his mind off of it. Like Rabbi Baravona said, a person has to pay attention and touch or pay attention to his tefillin every single moment. And we learn this from the tzitz, that it's much more so even than the tzitz. If when it comes to the tzitz, the Eibish's name is only mentioned once, that it should be on his forehead constantly, meaning that he should not take his attention off of it. Tefillin, sheyesh ben maskaris harbe. So in the tefillin where you have the Eibish's name mentioned so many more times, alachas kama v'kama, definitely you shouldn't take your mind off of it. So that's what you learn out from this tamid. So this just to finish off with a sicha from the Rebbe and Chelik Yudalet Parshas Hazinu. The Rebbe speaks about this comparison from the tzitz to tefillin, and there's actually a machlokes rishonim exactly what the comparison is. When you look in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe says that although by the tzitz you're not allowed to take off your mind of it, literally, any time, you shouldn't be Masiach Das at all. However, when it comes to tefillin, the Isser is only not to have schaik v'kalis reish, frivolous behavior. But just to take your mind off of it, that's not an issue. And the question is, if we're comparing it to tzitz, What's the difference? Especially if it's a kal v'chaimer. The tefillin has many more as kaddish of the Eibishter's name in it, more than the tzitz. So the pshat the Rebbe says is, since the very fulfillment of the mitzvah of tefillin includes the shibud hamayach v'halev, that you're subjugating your mind and your heart, and you're standing in awe of the Eibishter, that you're putting on the tefillin, that's part of the very mitzvah itself. So therefore, if a person begins the mitzvah with that attitude, so then that attitude continues automatically the rest of the time, even if he's not directly paying attention to it. If it starts with that attitude, it continues throughout the mitzvah automatically. Unless the person directly has tzchaik and kalas roish, so then the initial behavior that it began with in the mitzvah, the shibud alev, gets removed. Whereas by the tzitz, you don't have that. By tzitz, a part of the mitzvah of wearing the tzitz is not the shibud hamayach v'alev that there is in the beginning. So therefore, by the tzitz, the kohen has to have the das on the tzitz constantly in order for it to be meratzeh for the karbanis. That's the pshat that the Rebbe explains in the Sikha according to the Alter Rebbe.